wanted to go back and do a fun history lesson tonight. It was like, what? I know. I don't know about you, but as a mom, when the kids were younger and you did history review, quizzing your kids for different things, I didn't remember what I should have studied when I was a kid. And so when my first one, we would do, literally in the room here, we would throw the ball. Every time I got a right answer, I toss the ball. If you got it wrong, I whack them with the ball. So we had a fun thing where we're asking questions, quizzing them, and what have you. And 2 years later, my other son would go through the same thing. I would forget quite a bit of the history lesson, but it was kind of fun for me to rekindle some of the things, the Christian heritage that we had. And I found that that's what happened with me when I was reading through. And I want to just do a recap. I don't want you to turn it off, the knob, but I want you to see that God sees us, He hears us, and He rescues us. And when I saw it from a different perspective, this time from the Voice version, I just felt like God gave me that fresh manna that I wanted just to share and highlight with you. The end of Genesis, you have the life of Joseph, and everybody's familiar with Joseph. So we know that Joseph's family eventually went to Egypt because Joseph was there in the famine. Because they had no other food, God gave him the vision. He's there, and the hand of God is on His people. And so when the hand of God's on His people, they prospered. The promises of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now you see in the land that they're there. And I don't know about you, when I started thinking about it again, I'm like, okay, why did the children of Israel get into bondage? It was just kind of like, I don't remember. So when I was reading in from Genesis into Exodus, I'm like, oh, I thought they were in bondage for 400 years. They weren't into bondage. They lived there for about 400 years. And it was towards the end of that time that things started to happen. I'm like, oh, okay, so my refresher course. And when I looked at it again, I realized how caught up God was in some really cool details. When Joseph died, so did his brothers, that the entire generation was gone. The people of Israel were prolific. They had children easily, and their numbers increased rapidly. And their numbers grew, so did their strength. Okay, so God had promised that. To Abraham, you'd be a father of many nations. And so they were doing that quite well. Matter of fact, I had fun looking at commentaries. It said some of the modern writers of the day talked about how the midwives would refer to how many children they were given at one birth. It would be triplets and quadruple. I'm like, that is prospering. I'm not sure if I'd like to have been the mother at that time with that prosperity. So here God's blessed them. He's fulfilling His promises to them. But what happened after that is that generation is gone. Here comes a new person, and it says in verse 8, it says, one day a new king, and in other translations, the king also in Egypt was also called Pharaoh. And they were generic names, so it would be one Pharaoh after another. And it says that he came to power and ruled over Egypt, but this king had no knowledge of Joseph. We know that Joseph, it was the favor of God over Joseph, right? Everything he did, it prospered and was blessed, and the men around him knew that, and he was elevated to the second in command, correct? So here comes a man, the new king has arrived, and he is ignorant. He does not know history. He does not realize that Egypt is blessed because why? God's chosen people. The blessing was there. That I want us to understand is we are part of the seed of Abraham. The blessings are always to be upon His people. And God's desire is the blessings to follow us. So it's not just about you. It is God wants to bless you so that those around you also experience that blessing. And see, the new king in town did not know that. He did not have the knowledge. No one informed him, and he did not seek it out. Look at the damage that happens out of our ignorance. It says that Pharaoh, that more Israelites, he saw the Israelite people, and he saw how they were growing in numbers. And it says they were becoming more powerful than we are. So in his mind's eye, all of a sudden, he sees the lay of the land. They're in his land. They're influenced by their pagan ways. But yet God is continually blessing them. And he says, now we need to be careful. All of a sudden, the Pharaoh has schemed something in his mind. Okay, we all do this though. I started thinking about this Pharaoh. He's no different. Have you ever thought about like, okay, if I'm wondering like when my son's going to come home and it's getting late, and why has he not come home? He's an hour past what he said. I haven't heard his text. I'm like, all of a sudden your brain just went somewhere. I have created a whole storyline of what just happened with him. Where is he at? What's going on? And why have I not heard from him? Right? Can any of us know that we can tell a whole story within 2 seconds? Right? And now what happens when we tell a story? In our brain, it was so fast that all of a sudden your blood pressure and your energy and everything, we can become stressed out, and something is bigger than Dallas. And yet, at that moment, really think about it. We have no idea what happened. But in our eyes, in our ignorance, not knowing the facts, we created something, and now we perpetuate a whole mood or a stress in our own lives. The Pharaoh, he saw something, and he thought he knew, and he started acting on his fear. Because it says that he feared that they would actually, the Israelites would turn on him. And he began to act out of no knowledge, but out of his own fear of being taken over. So he proactively, that's how the people of God became enslaved. And I realized it was not that they were disobedient. It was not that the Hebrew people were bad. You know what? Sometimes bad things happen to us. And it's not that you disobeyed God. It's not that you're out of God's will. But sometimes bad things happen. Sometimes we are used and abused, and rough, damaging things happen to our lives, and you have no control of it. See, the people of God had no control. It was the fear and the ignorance of one man perpetuated a whole scheme that he would have to thin out the race of the Hebrew people so they would not, in his thought, overtake them. Yet there was peace amongst them for hundreds of years. But he did not know that. How is it that we in our lives, at different points in our lives, we have had things done to us that have been wrong? And it's not that God's not looking on us and he's removed his blessing on us. It's not the case. I wanted us to realize that the people of God were oppressed, and it said they oppressed them with hard, back-breaking labor. And so they began to build. So the children of Israel now are building all these monuments and buildings for the Egyptians. And they think, this Pharaoh thinks he's smart enough to think that he can damage them and control them to the point that they'll submit to him and there's no way out. And out of his fear, look at what he's done. He's affected not only all of God's people, but also even the Egyptians. We see that. Isn't that a powerful thing to think about one person, how their fear and their lack of knowledge can affect us? And so now he's acted on. Now he's trying to enslave them. He's trying to do harsh things on them. And yet, what's really cool about what God does is the Egyptians grew to detest the Israelites even more because they saw that it says that the Israelites were more rapidly growing with more children. They weren't going, it wasn't doing anything. It was not having an effect. Can we say that in our lives when hard things happen? We need to stay our course and know who we are in God and not allow any device of the enemy to take us down. These Israelites were still living out knowing the blessing of God was on them no matter what. And so now plan B, he's got another plan. So the Pharaoh goes to the Hebrew midwives and he talks to two of them. Now there's a theory. It's either the women, these two women were a part of a corporation and they were the representative of these midwives because they were flourishing. Or they only needed two women that he was going to use to pinpoint, to use them to bring fear on them, that it would be like fire and they would get the news out and everybody would fear the Pharaoh and what he was requiring them to do. So that's the theory. I don't know. However, it backfired on him because it would be these two midwives that said, when he told them that when you go to help give birth to these Hebrew women, kill the boys, right? So we know the story. However, this is what I find intriguing, is the midwives, they respected God more than they feared Pharaoh. So they did not carry out his orders. And what's even more fascinating, how cool that they feared God over this man, this authoritarian man. And so he calls them back in. Okay, the women outright lied. And you know what? I don't see that God chastised them. So I'm like, oh, you could get away with lying here. I was like, oh, okay. Because the women, they gave a story about how the Hebrew women are hardy and energizer and they give birth before the midwife arrives to help, which may be the case, but they kind of told a little bit of a story. And so God was good to the midwives, and under their care, the Israelites women had many more children. So God blessed them. The provision that God made to use these women to protect his own people, that God does see that. So here is that the people of God, I didn't see in that first chapter that the people were crying out to God for help to deliver us. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. They haven't, because in chapter 2, God is already making a plan in a way. Because why? Because God sees his people hurting. He's like, God's already making a way before they even asked. And I'm like, God, you make a way for us. You know we're hurting. You know we've been hurt and we've been abused or misused and life has been tough. God has already been doing something before we pray for it. So I get excited because I've been studying this and it's just becoming revelation of how God cares for us. And so in chapter 2, it says a man and a woman, they were in the lineage of the tribe of Levi, which I thought, oh, cool, God. Where the priesthood would come from is where you brought a man and a woman that would give birth to what? Moses. And that how God was going to use that to be the deliverer of his people. And when I saw that, I'm like, wow, God, not only that, the Numbers talks about who they are, but God, you cared about that woman being able to raise her child because she'd already had Aaron and Miriam, the other two kids. And so they protected. It's like God had been speaking to them because they knew to protect their next born child for the last 3 months. And what was really touching in my life when I saw what God had done, he allowed her to end up raising Moses, right? And I know I've seen it before, but it's like, I get you, God. You not only were making a path and a way to deliver your people, you were caught up in making sure you cared for the people along the way. And so you picked out this couple to be able to then know that they would protect the child, raise a child in the Hebrew ways, in the ways of the Lord. The second, like verses 1 through 3, it talks about the preparation they make. So they've hid the child. They're also going to use Miriam as a helper in putting Moses in the right place. But where does Moses go? How does Moses get there? A basket. So they're giving directions on the basket. Do you realize, if you look at the Hebrew word, which we don't probably study every day, right? It's teba. And the word actually derives, the word basket here in another translation is ark. Do you know what God did? There's only 2 places where we reference an ark. And so we know what God did. He brought a provision of an ark to protect Noah, to carry on the lineage and the blessing of God, right? Now, again, there's a basket, but it's also an ark to protect the provider of the restoration and the protection of his people. I'm like, wow. So here we go. We have this basket, which is the ark, and its position is during a time, though, that the Egyptians are having a religious ceremony, and it's then when the daughter is going to be positioned in a place where they bathe. And so Miriam knows, and when you read some of the commentary, it's realizing that Miriam's going to be positioned and make sure that someone in Pharaoh's place is going to see the child. God was caught up in all these details to know the timing and the placement so that because of where the positioning was and where Pharaoh's daughters would go to bathe, they would have a place in a wall of protection so the crocodiles wouldn't get there. So there is so much detail that we don't normally, when you just breeze through it, you don't sketch it. Crocodiles would have eaten Moses, even in the ark. So there was a timing. God has a timing and positioning and timing to rescue us if we just look for it. Whew, that's good. We have the whole storyline now where the Hebrew, they call the Hebrew daughter, but we know it's Miriam. So Miriam is the one that's going to help to connect the dots. And so it's all about how God uses them in the conniving way to make sure that it's positioned where Moses goes, now why? Look at this. Moses is going to be taken care of by his Hebrew family, and he's going to get all the benefits of the Egyptian education. He will be well-versed in military and in math and in all the most excellent education from the Egyptians and all that he would ever want. And then he also has a heritage in the blessing of the Lord. All in one package in Moses. And still have not seen where the people of God have been crying out and asking to be rescued. This is all that God's been doing. Now he's doing prep work to get everything ready. Obviously, we know that the Pharaoh's daughter does discover the child, and so the arrangement is that we know then the parents are basically helped to raise the child, and then Moses is adopted. So we know that part. But I wanted to go in and just highlight something that it touched me when you see what God was doing, and that here Pharaoh's trying to orchestrate to destroy every child, and yet look what happens. A child comes into his own home. I think that's the humor of God, right? That God would actually put in his face, into his space, the very thing he was trying to destroy. God's trying to get his attention. So there's mercy that God has, even for the enemy. God's hope is that we all would have life, right? So that's a fun thing I saw. And then it says, so that Pharaoh actually then, at that point, the Pharaoh dies. Now if another Pharaoh comes up, and he's not any better. So there's still going to be the oppression. And it says in the last part of chapter 2, it says that the Israelites continued to moan because of their bondage. Now that they have a new Pharaoh, they're still under bondage. Now it says they cried out to be rescued from their oppression. Their cry for help ascended to God. He heard their pleas and remembered the covenant he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the situation the people of Israel were in, and he was moved to take action. So I don't know why I'm so excited about it, because I see hope that every one of us need to have. That no matter whatever our state is he hears us and he truly is listening. Because I don't know about you, but there's times where I just have to pause and I kind of cry out literally. I did that last night. Cry out pretty loud to my groanings that God, that you would make a way and you would do a breakthrough in this person's life and in this person's life. And knowing that God is so caught up and that it says the groanings ascend to heaven, and he acts on those things. And that's God's heart for us. And so it goes into the third chapter. It says, God then begins to prepare Moses. Now Moses has grown up, he's educated, and now he has to capture his attention and begins to speak to him. And so now we know that the time where Moses is in the presence of God and God begins to deliver a message. And this is what I enjoyed in this translation. It says, I have seen how my people in Egypt are being mistreated. I have heard their groanings when the slave drivers torment and harass them. For I know well their suffering. I have come to rescue them from the oppression of the Egyptians, to lead them from the land. And later on, we know the story about how Moses, he's kind of taken back, and he's fearful. And so God has to encourage him. How many, when God's told us to do something, we're hesitant or we're distracted or something causes us not to operate in what God's told us to do? Tonight, God's capturing your attention. He wants your attention. He wants you to listen to him, that he's been hearing you. He's been making a way before you even ask for his help. He wants to deliver you into a place where this blessing is. The blessing that God has, it was for not just for you to have it, is because we are to reflect his glory. God says, I will draw all men unto me. How is he going to draw all men if he says, I put my glory into you and to you, so that we reflect his glory? And that is a part of why we are scattered, to draw people unto him. So if we're reflecting his glory, He wants to pour into us his blessings. It's not so much financial, but it's everything, spirit, soul, and body, that we live in whole in that peace. Wow. The treasures, the things I have, I would do away with them. To have the relationship with God is more important than values, right? Yes. To know that my family knows Christ as her Lord and Savior, that's my treasure. When I was looking at preparation tonight with looking at the guest list from a year ago this month, it grieves my heart and makes me rejoice because I saw a lady's name named Cindy Burke that we prayed for. And she's in heaven today. And my heart was sad and happy at the same time. She's in a better place with my mom, but it made me sad because I'm like, we prayed for her. And he decided to rescue her in a different way. And, but God knows. So now God knows how he wants to take care of the people that are still here. We got the hard part. We got to stay and linger and do our stuff, right? It's harder to stay here. But just like the Hebrew people, he's already got a way to provide for us. And he's very detailed in it. And he's been orchestrating something in our lives to touch us, to help us to look to him and do what he told Moses, says, fear not. Trust me. I will lead you in all the steps. I mean, the scripture is beautiful. Do not fear, Moses. I will be with you every step of the way. And this will be the sign to you, for I am the one who sent you after you have led them out of Egypt. And you will return to this mountain, and you will worship God. And we have to be reminded we must, what? Worship him. He just wants our attention. Recognize him. I am who I am. God was watching over all of the details with the people. And we know how, remember how when Moses then got caught up when he saw his people enslaved, and then he ended up killing someone? What did he do then? He ran. Some of us have run from our calling, run from what God's told us to do, run because there's been opposition, running thinking that that is just the way it's supposed to be. God has been trying to capture your attention. And so in you running, and maybe the idea of running is that you're just not actively doing what you know you're supposed to do. Maybe you are more like Moses than you thought. Maybe God has been doing something in your life and you see that all these obstacles are God's way. You know what? When it's God's way, it's hard way. It's hard. It is never easy. I think I just said that to one of the prayer team members. It's just never easy. God's ways are higher than ours. It's hard to understand when hard things happen and disappointments happen. And we think we knew what God wanted to do, but the way he's going to get us there, it never looks the same. It never, in my mind's eye, it never has gone the way I thought it would be. And yet, I wrestle with it. I'm like, okay, but I have to go back. Then I'm like, but God, I trust you. I have to trust you. And that's what he wants us to do, just to trust him and not have a fear. Moses ran away, and he got a new occupation, and he left the land. He literally started a new occupation. Did you know that? He ran away from his calling. And he got a wife. He helped someone. You know, these women were being harassed, and he ended up getting a wife out of that deal, and he became a shepherd. Right? Okay. If you're running away from what God's trying to do inside you, you know what? Maybe it's for you to receive healing from something or forgiveness. Walk it out. Sometimes I feel like sometimes the drama that we have in our lives, I'm like, oh, my boys are like, they do not like drama. I'm like, me neither. I'm like, I just cannot stay around drama. It's just like, ooh, too much overload. And I don't think that God wants us to be caught up so much in the drama as much as fix my eyes on you, Lord. How do you want me to approach this? How do I need to step back and look? How do you want to go about fulfilling your promises in my life, in my children's life, in my loved ones' lives? Because I can think around and look around the room of familiar people, and I'm like, I'm still believing with them for what God's put in their heart that's supposed to happen. And I know that he will do it because God is faithful, and he's orchestrating things that we don't necessarily know right now and see it. And so Moses ran away even after knowing everything. And yet, what I find at the end in chapter 4 that I wanted to get our attention to close here is this. Even after Moses gave every excuse under the book, and I have heard so many excuses of why people are not even involved with iRefresh or why they bail and they leave. And I bless them when they leave, because they have to do what they need to do, whatever they're supposed to go through. And maybe God's using them to do other things, and that's okay. But I also know as long as they're following God and obey Him, that is awesome. And it's not necessarily be here for a season, but as long as I know that they're fulfilling their destiny, and I get excited about that, because your destiny is important, the influence. Think about the Pharaoh. His influence was dramatic. If we look at the plagues, remember, he tried to kill the Hebrew children. What was the last plague? It was backfired, right? It was destroy his children. You know, you do not mess with God's people. God will take them out. But He's a God of mercy, but He also is a God who's just, and He will take care of us. When you know that, you don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to protect yourself, because God can protect you. And He does a lot better job, don't you think?
Amen.
So much better. And this is what I think the Lord would have us to know. Is in chapter 4, verse 1. Moses said, what if they don't trust me? Because he's like, okay, I killed them. They knew about it. They were afraid of me because I killed them, maybe. It's like, okay, so they're not going to trust me. I know they saw me kill somebody. So he had some anger issues. What if they don't listen to a single word I say that God gave them? They are more likely to reply, the Eternal has not revealed Himself to you. Like, there's no way God spoke to you. I'm like, think about that. When God's given you something that's pretty major, we can learn from Joseph. You're not necessarily supposed to share your dream just with everybody.
Yeah.
All right? It got him in a heap of trouble for a very long time. So protect your dreams. Protect your vision. Because even Moses, he's thinking, this is like, nobody's going to believe me. Like, you're going to use me to lead your people out? Yeah, right. Okay, so, and I was in the Pharaoh's, a daughter, da-da-da-da. They're just, how could they possibly trust me? That is our God. He makes it so obvious that you could never do it. You could never do it. When you're positioned in the most impossible spot, guess what? Get ready. Get ready for the deliverance. Get ready to what He's going to do. This is God's response. He asked Moses, and I ask you tonight, what do you have in your hand? Moses had a shepherd's staff. What do you have? It's something that's that small. God will use something as small as a shepherd's staff. We know the story of how God used that staff, right? When the staff was up here, where was the victory? They were winning in the war. And when his arm came down, God used, Aaron and Hur to hold it back up. The power of the staff. What do you have? Look what God is going to do in and through your life. It's so simple. And yet we make such a drama out of it. We're like the Pharaoh. We have created a whole thing of fear to keep us from walking out your destiny. Not tonight. You've got an amazing destiny. Amazing calling on your life. God hears you. He sees you. He's going to rescue you and put you into the place where you're walking it out and you have that favor and blessing of God. Can you see it?